Okay,
Yeah,
recording.
ready.
Okay, so we're going to quickly review. How's that, Atara? And this way, you'll be all caught up. So, just to put it in context of the second half of Sefer Kohelet, we discuss how death is the unsurmountable foe, and therefore the speakers thereafter are going to have to explain how death doesn't cancel the meaning of life. On the contrary, through death, we understand what life is all about. So, the first speaker was the Chacham, who basically is, I'm going to call him the integrated Chacham, right? If you remember in Perek Bet, he was much more the philosophically oriented, wise person. One has to understand everything about the world. And in Perek Zayin, he seems to be much more of a pragmatic Chacham. Again, and that's why I called him the integrated, because he incorporates a lot of amilut, right? Meaning you should have wisdom to affect the surroundings in which you live. And what's his whole point? He says, death doesn't cancel life. On the contrary, through death, you appreciate the meaning of life. Okay, very nice. What is the meaning of life? He says the meaning of life is not to be nostalgic, right? It's to be very pragmatic. In other words, what death teaches us, and he says this with regard to every day in which we live life, is that there are certain things beyond our control, like death, like having a bad day, a good day. We know that there are going to be phenomena beyond our control, and that's what death reminds us of. And that should help us not only become about what we can't control, but encourage us to control whatever we can. In other words, the point of life is to control our environment as much as we can, to control ourselves, which means that you should have a good parnasa, right? That's being in control and being responsible. And how will you be most in control and do basically whatever is good for you, right, in this world? That's through wisdom. So the more you learn, the more you can really, not only, he says, learn everything about everything, but the more you can get away with things, right? Meaning take a little bit of morality, but a little bit of frivolity and a little bit of theft and a little bit of everything. And this way, right, be the best lawyer you can be, and you'll know all the loopholes to the law. And that's how you'll live the greatest life. Who does not like this at all? Comes along the Elokim, and he says, if you do that, then you undermine one of your basic values. In other words, you're saying that morality is a means to an end. That morality is really just the means to, is one of the means to chachma, to being in control. But it's just, one of many. He says, but if you're always looking out and for controlling everything around you, in the end, it comes at the cost of morality, which he calls the ishara'ah, right? That evil, seductive wisdom. And therefore, he says that death doesn't teach you that the goal is to control everything that you can control. On the contrary, death is a reminder that we don't control anything. And that's the proof that God controls everything. And therefore, the point in life is really to be that moral person, to always submit to the will of God. And if you submit to the will of God, you may not see, he knows, you may not see the repercussions right away. You may not always appreciate the consequences, but eventually you will. And you should know that you can't control anything. So you may as well put everything in the hands of God. Came along the Nehentan, and I see that I froze. So 1 second. Okay, I'm defrosted, I think.
No, it's
Came
fine.
along,
You didn't freeze for me.
yes, Mitsuyan came along the Nehentan and says, wait a second. Firstly, Mr. Yirei Elokim, and that's not true. It's not true that God is in control of everything because look, man also, remember we discussed Elie Wiesel, right? That it's not God who killed 6 million Jews, it's man. Man killed 6 million Jews. Man controls. And even if you want to say that there are consequences, he says no one really thinks about them because sometimes there's such a long time between the act and the consequence. He says if God really wanted to show he was in control, then then he would make it very clear, right? You did something wrong, bolt of lightning. You did something right, pot of gold, falls down from heaven. Basically, he says the very fact that we see man being in control and we don't see the consequences. As a matter of fact, we see plenty of wicked people who are going against the will of God, plenty of wicked people who seem to be just fine till their dying day. And they're even in the same cities in which they committed their crimes. So I'm sorry, Mr. Yirei Elokim, but your philosophy doesn't work. And by the way, Mr. Chacham, he turns also to the Chacham and he says, your whole point is to be able to control everything, but in fact, and you can, there's more that you can't control than you can control. And the worst part is that that your eyes are never going to see sleep, because you're always going to say, I'm going to find it. I'm going to find the cure for cancer, but you're not going to find the cure for cancer. And there are so many people, we discuss all the medical research and the billions of dollars that are invested in medical research. And basically, he comes along and he says, okay, lo yuchalim, so you're not going to be able to find this. And therefore, he turns at the beginning of Parak Tet to both the Chachamim and the tzaddikim, to the wise and to the Yirei Elokim. And he basically says, I'm sorry to both of you, but again, no, don't think that you can control anything. And it's not that God controls everything. Everything is just so random, and everything eventually comes to an end. So death actually teaches us not that we control or don't control. Death teaches us that everything, in fact, comes to an end and that there's no point in life. So you may argue, okay, that's it. That's what you're going to say. There's no point in life. We should all join a suicide club. So he comes along and he says, okay, again, there is no point in life, but you may as well, between life and death, it's better to be alive than to be dead, for two, really, I'm even going to say, very superficial reasons. Number one, because at least when you're alive, you know you're going to die. Whereas when you're dead, you don't know anything. And you're supposed to say, that's ridiculous. But yep, that's the only reason to stay alive. And the other is that when you're alive, at least people know you, right? People know, the delivery, people, your neighbors, your family knows you. And when you're dead, everyone forgets you. So again, you may as well be alive for those two reasons, not really because there's any meaning, but it's better than the alternative, which is death. And therefore, if you're already alive, just enjoy it. Enjoy it however you can. Put as much mousse in your hair as you want. Again, go on drugs, drink as much alcohol, drive like a crazy person. Really just do whatever comes to you. Again, love one woman instead of loving 1,000 wives. You'll probably be happier that way. Take it from Shlomo HaMelech himself. And therefore, he says, I can prove it to you in the long term, even not just through the phenomenon of death, but through death itself. He says the worst part of death is that we really don't control anything. It's all predetermined. We don't control it. He says, I'll prove to you. It comes to you pitom. You can't even plan for your death. And that's why Chazal say, so prepare for it every day, because you really don't know when it's going to be. And today may be our last day. And to take that into account and make the most of every day. It says, but the worst part is that it comes pitom. So in response to this, there really are only two last personalities standing. And comes the Chacham to defend himself. And he says, I'm sorry, Mr. Nehentan, but come on. Really, wisdom really is the best. Look around at the world. And the people who get the most out of the world are the wise people, because even when a strong king besieges a city, it's the wise person who knows how to make it out of the city. But then in the same breath, he says, even though wisdom is the best, it's so sad that society does not value wisdom, meaning it works in the philosophical laboratory with which we always started, but it doesn't work in the practical world. In other words, he says, no one's even going to remember the man who escaped the city. Similarly, people should listen to wisdom. People should listen to wise people, because they really are. That is, the cybersecurity, especially today, is your stronger asset, even than the infantry soldiers. He says, but no one really recognizes that. And lev chacham limino, lev ksiel lismolo. He says, and I don't know why, right? But people don't respect wisdom. And they'd rather go hear, frivolous talk and foolish talk than they do hear wise talk. And he says not only that, but particularly there are two arenas in which we find that wisdom doesn't seem to succeed. He said one of them is the world of politics. That you would think that it's the wise people. Generally, there are wise people who enter the world of politics. But at the same time, you have people who are just so foolish. And the problem is that the foolish people spoil all the good of the wise people. And we know this, by the way. I'll speak about this all the time. Meaning it's not just about being foolish. It could be a wise person who just isn't thinking, in a wise way. It's so strange. You see what's going on in the world today, and you can't help it but say, like, okay, where are the wise people? Like, where are the historians who know the vicissitudes of history and appreciate intellectual history and understand that we're revisiting the early 1930s, when there wasn't an immediate physical threat to Jews, but where are all the wise people who like can see truth versus the fake news of of Hamas sympathy, right? And we're wondering, like, come on, like, I don't know about you, but I get very frustrated, not just with news channels, which is why I kind of stopped listening to the news, but just with, again, people's commentary on what's going on, today that, like, really, like, exactly what the Gemara says, that the world is just going to turn crazy, olam v'hipucho, and they're not going to understand. And we're thinking, like, it's not so hard to understand, like good versus evil, people who massacre and butcher versus a moral army, right? That you would think that people would get it, but they don't. And, if you would take a poll as to how many pro-Hamas versus pro-Israel, right? Wisdom should say that who should win the sympathy of the masses? Wisdom would say Israel, but the popular vote is going to say Hamas. Is that crazy? And you're supposed to say, yes, that's crazy. And that's exactly what's frustrating the Chacham. The Chacham who says, like, okay, it should work, like people should recognize wisdom. And therefore we discuss that even today, right? You would think, you educate, right? We're all teachers. We educate from a very young age the value of education and the value of consistent learning, the value of scholarship. And yet, it's very difficult because then our students enter the world of academia. They enter universities and they know that who does the world respect more? Not the professor, but the actor, right? Not the doctor, but the football player, right? And it's crazy. Meaning, if you would ask, think about this, you would ask any rising senior, ask anyone in university, right? Okay, who do you respect more? On paper, they'll say, of course, my professor. And yet they have a choice on Sunday to go listen to a lecture or to go to a football game. What will they do? They'll go to that football game. Notice I'm not even talking about Torah for now, and all the devices, because obviously Torah, Kihem Chaino Baruch Yaminu, he's talking just in terms of literally the universal phenomena. And the Chacham keeps saying, he says, really, wisdom should be clear to everyone that this is the best way to live your life, but it's not, in which case it doesn't work as the best way, right? Everyone see that because the world doesn't value wisdom. So in the end, it's the wise people who aren't necessarily the most taken care of. It's the wise people who don't necessarily live the best life. They can live a life of frustration. And that's number one, the world of politics. Secondly, he says, how about accidents, right? The whole point of wisdom was also to control your environment, but it's so clear that there are so many phenomena that are beyond our control, right? Meaning even as a Tara is driving so carefully because she's not looking at the phone, because Nava's holding it, amazing Nava, kol hakavod. Again, it's so scary because no matter how responsible, no matter what a wise and cautious driver you are, if you have chas v'shalom, a drunken driver, on the road with you, then your life is in danger. And that's beyond your control, no matter how wise you are, no matter how sophisticated a car you have, no matter, how quick your reflexes are, right? It doesn't help. And therefore, that's a second argument. He comes back and he says, but still, everyone knows, like a wise politician versus a silly politician. The wise politicians don't eat in the morning, they act in the morning. It's the silly ones that just care about what tie they're going to wear or what they're having for breakfast. It's, well, what can I tell you? In the end, and you think that the silly person, like his whole house, should, the wolf should be able to huff and puff. And yet in the end, he says, what can I tell you? That somehow, literally, today we can take that literally, right? That if you act, right, not just, right, mischak is the art of acting, that actors make a lot of money, right? Here he means even laughter. Somehow, people who aren't so wise have a lot of money, right? Do you ever meet people like that, right? It's very, again, and you wonder, like, okay, I'm not sure how they did this, but it happens. V'yayin yasamachayim. And you know what? It's not wisdom that really gives you a good night's sleep or helps you enjoy life. Sometimes it's just a good glass of wine. In the end, it's not wisdom that always procures the money, right? Sometimes people just have the money, and that seems to control more than anything. And I hate to say it, but even in our 21st century, think about this. This is Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of men, and he recognizes that it's not his wisdom that people really respect, meaning Malkat Shema respects it, but it's really more the money and the wealth. And it's so sad that, that money talks, right? Shouldn't wisdom speak? And shouldn't that be what people listen to? But they don't. They don't. There are all these commentaries, these, I don't know, talk show hosts, right? Any of you watch them? I don't encourage them at all. Every once in a while, I don't know, like how, like I never really saw Oprah, but I don't know when I would have seen it. I don't know. But sometimes there is, something called, again, um, I like all these people sit around the table. 1 second. What's it called?
A round table.
A round
Like The
table. That's
View? Like, are you talking
the
about The
view,
View?
the view, the view. Thank
It's a
you, the view.
horrible. Don't nobody should watch that show.
Well, exactly. I don't know like where I was watching it, maybe like in a store or something here, like in Honesdale, and like listening to people who like thousands of people are listening to. It's like they're not making any sense. Does everyone realize? Like I was thinking to myself, please tell me that everyone knows that they don't know what they're talking about. Like on any matter, they weren't just talking politics. They were talking about, I don't know, the weather. They were talking about, it's really exactly what Kohelet says here. They were talking about who they think this was before Kamala Harris, when they were talking about who would be best for the Democratic Party and who's definitely going to win. I was like, you're not Nevi'im. As a matter of fact, like you really don't know what you're speaking about. And it reminds me of Perek Yu, Pasuk Yudalit, Hasachal Yarbet Dvarim, Lo Yedeh Hadam Ma Sheyeh. It's a foolish person who just keeps talking, even though he doesn't know what's going to happen. Basher Yamacharav Miyagid Lo, because who tells God, what's going to be thereafter? Like I had mentioned my brother-in-law, who is a pediatric, an interventional pediatric radiologist, and during COVID, he told me, he said, Johnny, don't listen to any doctors who tell you that they know like when COVID's going to end or what the cure is going to be, because those are the ones that don't know, right? Anyone who's really smart, anyone who knows that they don't know, right? Knows that we'll have to wait and see. And that's exactly his point. So Tara, now you're all caught up because we're up to the last man standing. Now we're up to the Yirei Elokim, Perek Yud. But really, just like we ended our last year by saying that the last pasuk of the Chacham is L'schokos of Lechem, V'yayin Yisamachayim, V'akesef Yaneh Takol. Pasuk Chaf, at the end of the last parak, which again is very reminiscent of Parak Dalet, Pasuk Yud, which was the introduction to the Yirei Elokim, which the Christians divided up terribly. Right? Pasuk Chaf seems to be the beginning, actually, of the Yirei Elokim. How do I know? Take a look at the words. And it begins with Gam b'madzacha melech, even in your knowledge of the king, al tekalel, meaning no matter how close you are to the king, don't curse him. And in the privacy of your room, al tekalel ashir, don't curse the wealthy man. Because there's a little birdie. I was going to tell you who wins color war, right? Basically, there's always that bird who's going to take your voice, ubal knafayim, literally the winged creature, yagid dabar. Please remember that term, yagid dabar. That basically it's going to be, and the bird will always, in the end, he'll share those secrets, right? Ubal knafayim
It
yagid dabar.
reminds me so much of Pirkei Avot again. Like I hear it every time you speak, it reminds me of Pirkei Avot, and
Uh-huh.
I would like to create something like a
Oh,
chart.
Avital, I'm so excited you said this. So I started working on this about 12 years ago and I never finished it. And let's do it together, basically.
I would love
Like,
that.
meaning I'll share with you, right? Because you know that every Masechet in Mishnah is basically Torah Shabbal Peh, right? On so Zra'im is for all the, all the agricultural halachos, Torah Shabbal Peh. You ready for this? Perkei Avot is the Torah Shabbal Peh for Sefer Mishlei. Is that
Mishle.
remarkable? It's really more Mishlei, meaning every pasuk in Mishlei, you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's Pirkei Avot. And however, it makes sense because there are many psukim in Mishlei that are parallel to, especially the ends of Kohelet, right? Because the beginning of Kohelet is much more apikorsod, right?
Thing
The
about
ends of
not
Kohelet,
speaking and the world
exactly.
here.
Mea Achilles. I would say the last three prakim of Kohelet are very, very much him revisiting Sefer Mishlei in a much more caustic way, right? He's much more cynical here in Kohelet than he is in Mishlei. So 100%. So Avital, I'm serious. That's what I've been doing, like just mamash pasuk pasuk, and to realize, that's why Chazal are saying it this way, right? Which, by the way, makes so much sense. It really is exactly. It's Torah Shabbal Peh. And that's why today, you pick up a self-help book, you're like, wait, this isn't Pirkei Avot, and like Chazal said it way before. So every single Mishnah in Pirkei Avot has its parallel in either Mishlei or Kohelet. Isn't that remarkable? So yeah, so I'll share with you. It's handwritten, so I have to I have to computerize it. As soon as I do, obviously I'm going to share it with you. And in the meantime, you start working on it also, but really start with Mishlei before Kohelet. Or if you want, you can start up. But again, Shlomo started with Mishlei, and Chazal feel much more comfortable with Mishlei because, as opposed to with Kohelet, which mentions Elokim but not Yud Kei Vav Kei, Mishlei has a lot of Yud Kei Vav Kei. So it's a drummer there. Kol hakavod. I'm so happy that you saw that. Yasher koach. Really amazing. So indeed, right? Meaning so many. What is he trying to say here? Avital, which Mishnah were you thinking of? That even when you say something that you don't think anyone's going to hear, in the end,
Here.
B'diyoka, sofo davar lihishama, right? In the end, Chazal say exactly this. And who would be speaking about this? This doesn't sound like the Chacham. Okay, even, don't curse the king. And the winged creature is going to share what you said. That's not a Chacham philosophy. This is very much the Rei Elokim, who from the onset, again, spoke about, be careful, don't talk too much. Do you remember, again, don't get Elokim upset when the Malach comes and say, oh, shgagahim, and you have to be very careful. We had our whole discussion about a neder. Is it positive? Is it negative? The idea of accepting these commitments. So he says, certainly, do not curse, even if you know the king. Again, don't curse in private because eventually it's going to become public. Be careful with your words. This is clearly the Rei Elokim. So once again, we have to ask, why isn't there, as with the transition between any one of the speakers? By the way, Shira, welcome. I can give you a proper hello. Why is it that within the speakers, we don't have a transition? Amarti, again, even if you remember, take a look at the beginning of the Chacham speech. Even the Chacham began with right after the speech of the Nehentan, Pasuk Yud Gimel, in Perek Tet, he began Gam Zo Ra'iti, right? Chachma, Tachat HaShemesh, Ugdola Hi Elai. So why don't we have that? And if you remember, we discussed in Perek Dalid that that's exactly the point of Kohelet. I want to show you that Yirat Elokim is not a new observation, right? Morality isn't something that, one day, you just observe and you recognize. Rather, it usually comes when you realize that the other perspectives fail. It's like a natural outgrowth, and therefore it's not a new observation. And we're going to see it all the more so in the ensuing chapters, where he wants to show you that Yirat Elokim takes the other philosophies into account. In other words, anyone who's smart really knows that it's not worthwhile to curse, because eventually, you don't know when, but you know that there are going to be consequences, right? You know that, right? You tell someone a secret, what is he trying to tell you? There's no such thing as a secret, right? So just like Avital said, the Tanaim say, Sofo davar lehishama. Remember that whole story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? They're all talking about the Romans, and, one Tana saying how wonderful. Rabbi Yehuda says the rows are great, and Rabbi Yossi says, yeah, and look at, the taxes are terrible, but at least, they built us bathhouses. And comes along Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and says, you guys are nuts. They built prostitute homes. They're destroying our religion. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Papas is there. And eventually he tells the Romans, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's life is in danger. And we have Asara Haruge Malchut. In other words, don't think, even if you don't see the consequences right away. What is he trying to say? There are always consequences, even for the actions that you commit in secret. And therefore, Paragid Aleph is really the continuation. That's why I said that the Christians really didn't understand the chapter division here. Let's prove it. Shlach lachmacha al pnei hamayim. Send your lechem to the water. Doesn't mean this literally. This is like the speech of the Chacham. It's very poetic, right? And we've seen that with all the speakers here. Shlach lachmacha al pnei hamayim means send your seeds off to an irrigated field. Why? What happens when you plant? You know that eventually you're going to see results of the planting. And I always like to tell students this, where we're learning and you're thinking, okay, so much of this isn't really halacha lamasa. I'm telling you, everything you learn, it's going to come back, right? Even things that you learned, I'm sure you appreciate. Atara was telling me how even her second graders, right? Years later, they remember what you taught them. Like 20 years from now, Atara, they're going to remember what you taught them. Because there are, and by the way, they're going to remember things that you said that you don't even remember saying. They're going to remember like a cool mitpachat that you wore. I'm serious. Like it's scary. But they remember these things because there are consequences. So send off your plans, he says, because eventually you're going to see results. And basically what he's trying to show, especially after the last speech of the Nehentan, of the hedonist, is that even if you can't always draw a line between the action and the consequence, you always know there are consequences. Meaning when I reap my harvest at the end of the season, I don't know if it's from the seed from this season or from 5 years ago, but and it didn't come from nowhere, right? There are always consequences. And therefore, he says, so what do you want to do? Knowing that there are consequences, and notice what mashal is using. He's using the mashal of planting, which is such a beautiful mashal for life. I grew up in Morasha, where the divisions were, and Avi tell you too. Again, nitzanim, shtilim, ilanot, alufot, right? Basically, all different stages of the growth of a tree, and because that really is a mashal for life. So he wants to say, just like in life, you see the eventual sprouting of agriculture, so too, and in every aspect of life. And therefore, what would you want to do? If you know that there are consequences to your planting, then he proposes, so you may as well plant not only 7, which we know it, yes, this is one of the bases for 7 being a natural cycle, but do a little bit more, right? What we call mi'ala teva, right? Don't just plant 7 rows, plant 8 rows. Kilo teda ma yera'al haaretz. Because there are so many factors that you don't know and you can't anticipate. So you don't know what's going to happen. I remember I always like to, speaking about long-term, consequences. So in elementary school, we had science fairs that were taken very seriously. And especially 7th, 8th grade, like that was, was considered very, very significant to invest a lot. And our 8th grade science teacher, Mr. Bass, I remember he had like a whole protocol. Obviously, you know him also. He's very famous. Anyway, really phenomenal science teacher. And he, so we had to, it was always the effects of X on X, right? Those were the science fair projects in 8th grade. So I did the effects of calcium on plant root gravitropism. This is really fascinating, right? That calcium actually suspends the gravity of roots, which is very important if you're trying, like in Israel, to save space, right? Literally plant space. So you can't plant too many seeds next to one another because eventually their roots, right? The roots get tangled and then they literally like cut off each other's water sources and mineral sources. So you have to spread the plants. However, if you can control the roots, how do you control the roots? If you place calcium, it actually reverses the gravity of the growth of the roots. And instead, the roots grow upwards. So you can manipulate them, right? Obviously, you still have to provide them with soil. So I remember the standard was, right, that you have to plant 50, or basically 49. You go to Garden Depot or whatever it is, Home Depot, and you buy a 7x7, two 7x7s, fill them with soil, fill them with the seeds. And I was like, what? I need 49 in my experimental species and 49 in my control group. He's like, yeah, because you never know. You never know what's going to happen. So sure enough, and just to share with you, so again, Baruch Hashem, first time I did this, and what do you know, 40 out of 49, the roots turned upwards. Isn't that amazing? Amazing. Wow. Well, okay, went on to the state science fair. Went on to the state science fair, but the state science fair was 4 months later. So I had to throw out all the plants, start anew. Went to the same store, bought the same brands of soil, bought the same seeds, put it in the same place in the kitchen. And it's the day before the state science fair, the night before, and I remember this, only 16 of the roots out of 49, 16 were turned upwards. I remember my brothers, I had like older brothers who were like, Shani, we'll just like push the roots up. And and don't worry. Like, no, that's cheating science. I remember having a whole philosophical discussion with them. Anyway, Baruch Hashem, by the next morning, and lo and behold, there were about like 25. So half the group, and we're up, and Baruch Hashem, onto the next stage. But why is this significant? Because I was wondering, wait a second, that's so strange. Like, why 40 in one group and none in the other group? And the answer is that even though I bought the same brand of soil and wasn't the same exact soil, right? They're all different conditions each time, right? And those are things beyond your control. I realized only like months later that I also put in the same place in the kitchen, but it was 4 months after, which means that they weren't really getting the same amount of sunlight. Isn't that fascinating? But these are also, some of them in our control, some are out of our control. Take a look at what he says in Pasuk Gimel. Im yamaluhat bim geshem ala aretz yariku. He says when you plant, you really have no idea. Maybe the clouds will fill up with rain and you'll have rain. Maybe you pull eight badaro. Maybe there will be a hurricane and maybe a tree will fall in the south, the imbat safon, maybe in the north. Makom sheyipol eight sham yehu. Meaning that even though there are consequences to your actions, you want to invest as much as you can in the actions that will reap results, because you never know, because there are still things, even with your actions, even knowing that there are consequences, you can't always anticipate the consequences. Why not? Because there really are things beyond your control, such as rain, such as hurricanes. And therefore he says, Shomer Ruach Lo Yizra. Right? You all read The Grapes of Wrath. Remember that first scene where they lick their fingers and they're like trying to anticipate where's the wind going to come from, right? So that they know, okay, that's where hopefully the first clouds will come from. But that's exactly their point. And namely, Shomer Ruach Lo Yizra, the person who's really waiting for the first and the perfect winds, he'll never plant, because you don't know when the first winds are going to come. So too, the one who's waiting for the last rains will never harvest, right? Because you don't know when the last rains are. Sometimes they're March, sometimes they're April, sometimes they're like you have no idea. Those are things beyond your control. And that's why it pays to invest as much as you can. So he continues, just like you don't know the direction of the winds. That's beyond you. Now, remember we saw at the very beginning that he said, what do you mean? The wind, sovev, holech haruach, v'yalsiv v'votav shav haruach, that there are such clear patterns and everything is monotonous. All of a sudden here, in Parak Aleph, he says, yeah, there are patterns of winds, but we can't predict exactly what those patterns are. Right? Again, I brought up the movie Twister, and Gabi told me that Twister 2 just came out, right? About a pair of scientists who try to anticipate when a tornado is coming. And even if they can anticipate when it comes, right, they try to control the direction of the tornado, but you can't, because you don't know exactly with what speed it's going to come and how quickly it's going to pick up. Even in our modern scientific meteorological age, we know there are tornadoes. We know cycles of tornadoes even, right? I know that if there's a tornado in Nebraska today, I know that it's going to hit Pennsylvania 3.5 days later. right? With what speed? Could it turn? Is it going to be southwestern Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania? Really have no idea. He says, so too, katamim babeten hamleya. So too, you don't feel bones in a full stomach. What does he mean? He's referring to a pregnant woman. So today we have ultrasound, but once upon a time, people knew that there was something growing inside of them, but they can't tell you like what it is. It just feels like bones. It's so cool when the baby starts to like, push its elbow. You're like, oh my gosh, it has an elbow, and or a foot, whatever it may be. Now you know for sure it's the Yireh Elokim who's speaking. He says, so too. And so too God. Right? God does things that are beyond our control. So knowing that, we want to be able to anticipate and to invest and to plant as much as we can. Everyone see the Nimshal for Yirat Elokim? Namely, you're right. There are things beyond our control, right? He's also answering the Nehentan. It's true. It's true that Anna, that I don't always know exactly what the consequences are, but I do know, like statistically, I know that, nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. And therefore, I may as well do good things because good things will come from good things. And generally, bad things come from bad things. Now, can bad things, remember what the Nantan said? What do you mean? I see a lot of bad things happening to good people and good things happening to bad people. It's like, yeah, that happens. That does happen. And that's God. Right? But generally, good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, even in our day, right, where we see a lot of tzaddik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo. In general, what works more, really, tzaddik v'tovlo or tzaddik v'ralo? Look around. In general, it's tzaddik v'tovlo, right? Meaning, even if you say, well, what do you mean that person's a tzaddik and she got sick and yeah, but in the end, she got better. So Betovlo, right? Do you see that? Whereas, a Russia could also get sick and maybe not come out okay, as a result. Tzaddik Betovlo says, and therefore it pays to invest really in the good things. Do good things. Does that mean that everything's going to work out for you, like he said in Parakeh? No, but that's not you. That's God reminding you that there's a God, reminding you to do the best you can in that relationship. And therefore, Pasuk Vav, he says, Baboker's rat zaracha. So keep doing this. In the morning, i.e. in the early stages of life, plant those seeds. Invest, knowing that there are going to be results. And even in the later stages of life, don't give up. Chazal learned from here, Rabbi Yeshua says, from here we see, you should be osik b'pirya v'rivya when you're young, and osik b'pirya v'rivya when you're older. So even though we paskin like Hillel, that you should have that pirya v'rivya as a boy and a girl, based on Rabbi Yeshua says, you know what, have 2 boys and 2 girls, right? Why? Because you never know, we're going to see in a minute, you never know which ones are going to last. You never know which ones are going to survive, especially during times of mortality, right? So again, and not only that, right? By the way, the Rambam paskins that way, 2 boys or girls, but you don't have to have it through your children, also through your grandchildren, right? Which is very reassuring. So in fact, here, because you don't know, right, how much God is going to control or not. You don't know which ones are going to turn out okay. So plant in the morning, do good things, right? Invest in the early stages and in the later ones because you don't know which ones are going to last. And if they both last, amazing. So then you have more good. Great. At the same time, it really, again, you should know that the light is sweet and it's good for the eyes. Can anyone help me for a second? Whose phrase was that? It's good to see the light. It's good to see the sun. It's good to know what's going on around you. Whose mantra was that? That's not a Yireh Elokim phrase. That's a sorry, that's a
Don't know, but I'm guessing it's Nehem because it seems like get out and see the sun shine.
excellent. So it's actually the Chacham, right? The Chacham who was like, remember, look around, the Chacham Inabro show, going back even to Perik Bet. Gana, the Chacham would say, so know what's going on around you. Does the Yireh Elokim have anything against that? Have anything against Chachma? No. Just like the Chacham initially employed Yirat Elokim as a means to an end, but the end being Chachma, the The Yirei Elokim says the opposite. The goal is to plant good. The goal is to be a Yirei Elokim. On the way, go ahead, learn. Yes, again, it's always good to see the sun. It's good to understand what goes on around you. It is good, right? And by the way, this is really halacha l'maaseh. We're finally frum. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, this is like our one frum shir, which is a good thing because it's the last one. So you would want to end frum. So basically, again, he says here, of course it's good to understand, but that's not the goal, right? The goal, can I just share this with you? That right after my master's, I was encouraged, obviously, in the world of academia, Shani, go on for your doctorate, go on for your doctorate. So I started to go on for my doctorate. I actually switched the topic 3 times, but at a certain point, I was offered a scholarship to take off 3 years to work and to finish a doctorate. And I deliberated, should I take off 3 years from teaching? This was in my late 20s, early 30s. Should I do this? Like, should I take off 3 years? Oh, and the stipulation is that you're not allowed to teach, meaning you have to be a full-time student. And I was deliberating back and forth. It was the same time Professor Yoni Grossman, so he did it. And he's like, Shani, you should do this. We'll do it together. I remember him saying, and I said, but how can you stop teaching? He said, no, it's going to make me a better teacher. And I think it probably did. And when I was deliberating, I always give the credit to my husband for saying this. He said, Shani, and it's not like you can never do it, later on, but he said, if you're thinking of your priorities, and it says, Bezrat Hashem Me'ah Esrim, when you stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't think HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to ask you where your doctorate is. I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to ask you, how many lives did you have in Nefekza? How many neshamot did you try to inspire? Right? And I take that with me, every day, because I have to justify again obviously interacting with students and with people. And I really do think about this, and I think about these psukim in Kohelet, which is, of course, it's good. It's good to explore. It's good to know more. But bottom line, Hashem just wants you to be an Eved Hashem. And that's exactly what he says. Go, and keep learning. It's great. But just remember, Pasuk Chet, Kim Shanim Harbe Yachya Adam. He just incorporated Chachma. Take a look now, Chava, Pasuk Chet. And if you live a long time, B'cholam Yismach, you may as well be happy, right? That's the Nehentan, right? That while you're doing good moral things, there's nothing against being happy. Like, no one says you can't live in a nice house. No one says, you shouldn't have a nice wardrobe. No one says, you shouldn't eat a good meal, right? Everyone see this? You should also be happy. But just realize that that's not what life is about. It's not. Why? Because even when you're enjoying, remember the dark days. Okay, everyone, this gets really sad and depressing. You're all thinking to yourself, the whole Sefer was sad and depressing. But no, now it's like, really? Like, I'm just giving you a heads up over here. He says, even when you're enjoying, it doesn't just say like Zehar the Horban, remember the Horban? Know that the dark days are the days of old age. Remember that old age is going to set in. And you're going to realize that it's not really about this good meal because, and I always say, anyone who's lactose intolerant, like, gets it. Like, that ice cream, that chocolate hot fudge sundae. Even as I think about it, I'm getting hungry right now, but I know it. And he says, so have a hot fudge sundae. And you're like, but I know the stomach ache I'm going to have afterwards. Like, is it worth it? And by the way, sometimes you'll have the hot fudge sundae anyway. Again, sometimes you'll just take the lactate. Sometimes that there isn't lactate, you will have it, you won't have it, but that's exactly it. He says, that it's not about simcha. There's nothing wrong with simcha as a means, but it can't be the end because those days of darkness are going to come. So you may as well, ready for this? You may as well be happy when you're young. Do what's good for your heart when you're young. He says, no one's telling you not to do what you want, but but know that there are consequences for everything. So again, don't do drugs. Why? I know that it's very alluring, but there are going to be consequences. They're going to kill your brain cells, right? Don't eat too many artificial sweeteners because the aspartame is going to stunt your cell growth, right? I don't know, don't eat too much chocolate cake because you know that, it's not healthy in the long run. Don't drink too much alcohol because that's also not good for you in the long run, right? In the end, what is when you there are consequences. There are, right? Even when you're young. I've been telling girls, a lot of girls ask about army, shirut lumim. I said, even if you decide army, don't do combat, right? Why? Because, and they've proven this, because the basic training exercises put so much pressure on the uterine muscles that it has long-term consequences. Like, why would you do that? Because right now I want to do it and I get it, but think about the long term also. So too, doesn't pay to stay in a state of frustration. And this is so good for Shalom Bayit. Like whenever you're frustrated and realize that you're not going to remember why you were frustrated in a year from now. Forget about that. Even in a month from now. So doesn't pay to be in a state of bad. Literally, your youth is fleeting. So it's not about all these, ephemeral moments. Even when you were saying, Shani, enjoy the moment. You know how Google Photos, right? You have this, I think it's on every phone, but iPhones like share with you those moments. I was just looking at like, what we did over the past summers. And it's like, wow, I should really make an album. And then I was, no, I shouldn't make an album. Why? Because they were wonderful times. So I'm going to look back and, be nostalgic, like the Chacham says not to be. Now, obviously, they're wonderful memories. I'm not saying, but in the end, everyone say they're my memories, right? And maybe my children's memories. Are they going to be long-lasting memories? Are my great-grandchildren going to really want to see what I did in the summer of 2016? I don't think so. Now, again, they're very special. Don't get me wrong. They're special family time, but is that really, again, he says what you want to invest in, right? Again, that's fleeting. The past, the youth. Instead, Parak Yud Pasuk Aleph. Zachor et boracha b'mei bechoratacha. Remember your creator even when you're young. Ad asher lo yavo yemei hara'ah. Again, try to be good. I always quote this pasuk. I get this all the time. Usually I get it from girls, but I just got it from a boy, and I thought it was fascinating. Girls who say, Shani, I taught in French, Shira, when I taught, I substituted for a Haley one class, and I was teaching them Nagia, and like how, according to the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, it's Asur Doraisa. And they were like, yeah, I said, did you know this? They were like, yeah, we know. I'm like, okay, so is everyone going to be more careful with this? No. And I think that was it. Like, they didn't want me. Yeah, I got it. Like, they didn't want me to teach again.
Someone said they were very upset, like, why would someone tell us that you can't? And I was like, because it's important to know. I said, you'll be more upset if you found out later that people lied to you. I said, so if you're not ready to take it on, then hopefully at some point you'll see the value of it. But to not want to hear it because you don't do it is not.
Shira, thank you for clarifying that because I didn't understand. Because, like I told Rabbi Walt when he said, Racheli is going on Chufshat Leida, and I said, great, I would love to teach their Hayisha Mitzvot class. He's like, wonderful, wonderful. And then after that one class, he's like, no, Shani, it's okay. I'm like, what happened? Like, what did I do wrong? And the funny thing is that I'm going to teach these same girls next year.
Right, and then all of a sudden they're going to want that, and I always laugh when the girls come back from Israel. I'm like, the girls who I would beg to stop talking during davening and now are, and it is nice, but I wish, but I think that's something that everyone's always afraid of. But like my answer to the students were, no, like it's important to hear it. Even if I'm not judging what you do or don't do, but you still need to know halacha. And I'm like, it's better to know the halacha than to ever have to look back and say, had I known, like I would never even given the choice to keep the halacha because I didn't even know the halacha.
Exactly. So one of the girls did come to me after class and said, okay, Rabbi Nitzarkin, we just have to tell you that this is a social phenomena, meaning the social phenomena is that no one Shomeret Negiah in high school, but we all know that we're going to come back from Israel and we're going to be Shomeret Negiah. Similarly, so we all know that we're going to come back and we're going to be wearing long skirts in a year and a half. But right now, we're wearing pants. So I looked at her, I said, but so you know that the right thing to do is X. So you know that right now you're doing Y, which isn't the right thing, but like you're okay living this way now. She's like, yes, yes. Like,
It
but that
is
doesn't
the
make
weirdest
sense.
thing.
I remember
But
that.
the girls that came to me, actually, I think their part wasn't even the boy girl. I think it was they didn't realize how far it extended, that it meant like relatives and whatnot. And I said, it's so funny because before we became bat mitzvah, and I went to a co-ed school for elementary school that was not so whatever. Our teacher told us before I think I was one of the first bat mitzvahs in the class about the idea of like that Shomer Negiah went to uncles and other relatives. And I think that's where some like the girls that came to me, that was their thing. They're like, but what do you mean I can't hug my brother or my uncle or this or that? And I was very honest with them. I'm like, no one's ever our goal is to strive to keep all the mitzvot. And if you're not ready to keep something, that's one thing, but you should still know halacha. But I think that's something that we're always afraid to tell kids something that either they don't want to know, or their families don't keep yet, or they don't do. But I don't think that's a reason not to tell them,
Thank you. Thank you. So I have this now. A guy asked me, he said, all my friends, I don't understand. Like we all learned, Isser Negiah, but all my friends in camp, like aren't being makpid about it. But I know that we're going to go to Israel next year and they are going to be makpid about it. So does that mean like socially, I don't have to be makpid about it? And I said, oh my, I thought it was just a girl phenomenon, but I guess it's also a guy phenomenon. And I said, no, like we don't live our lives with diabed, consciously. Like, no. And this is exactly what Kohelet is saying. And I sometimes quote this pasuk even, Zachor et borecha b'mei bechorotecha. Like, okay, so what if you're pre-Israel? Like God is still in your life now. It's not like all of a sudden, halacha pops up when you're in Eretz Yisrael. You may as well remember your God, right? All the days of your youth. Ad asher lo yavo yemei hara'ah, until days that are going to come. The evil days are going to come. And then the days will come where all the other things in your life aren't going to matter anymore. It's really amazing, when you see people in their older age and they don't care about their wardrobes. They downsize their houses. They, all of a sudden, things that used to be important to them, they change their priorities. It's really remarkable. And so why not live life with those priorities when you're younger already? I remember it hurt me very much. My grandfather, Allah Hashem, would love, whenever he came to visit us in Long Island, he loved the kosher dairy restaurant and he loved ordering eggplant parmesan. And the two of us would always order eggplant parmesan. I remember once when he had just turned like 83 or something like that. And we went to the restaurant and he's like, no, I'm just going to have like plain pasta. I was like, Saba, eggplant parmesan, like that's our thing. We do. He's like, Shani, I hate to tell you this, but I can't even taste the eggplants anymore. And it was so sad. Like that's what happens. Your olfactory nerves and your taste buds die. And it reminds me also as a young girl going to nursing homes, and it always had like the same smell. And I realized after it's because like it always smelled like peas and mashed potatoes with like a little bit of a urine smell in the background, and even as I say it, like I'm remembering the smell. I remember as a young girl once, like going up to one of the nurses saying, like, every time I'm here, you serve like the same thing, like peas and mashed potatoes. Like, can't you switch their menu a little? And she looked at me like so sweetly. She's, honey, I still remember this. So, honey, they can't taste the difference anyway. And it's so sad, but that's true. Like, it can't be about what we eat because eventually we lose those nerve endings. And the days are going to come when the sun is darkened. In other words, when our eyesight starts going, and we can't see the light, we can't see the moon, we can't see the stars. Vishavu ha'avir machar hageshem. This is so brilliant, right? And the clouds come after the rain. What is he referring to? Basically cataracts, right? So today we have surgery that can clear up the clouds, but that's really mamash, a description of cataracts. And then people develop cataracts on their eyes. And then what's the next stage? The first thing that goes is one's eyesight. The next thing, pasuk gimel, b'yom sheyazu shomrei habayit. And then the guards start to shake. What are the guards of our body? Our bones, right? Then our bones start to shake. B'taftu anshe hachayil. And even the strong ones, like your spine, start to get crooked. You know, when the grandchildren say, why did Bubby and Zadie shrink? Right? They didn't shrink. It's just that, yeah, the gray matter of the spine condenses, and the spine, they start to kind of hunch over a little. Uvatlu hatachanot. What's the next thing to go? The grinders, right? The teeth. Isn't this amazing? It's like such a clear but sad description of old age. Uvatlu hatachanot ki me'etu. Now again, this is before dentures and crowns and implants. But the grinders stop working because there are so few left. And then even those who saw on the chimneys, I mean, even the ones who had a little bit of eyesight, that goes also. And then as the grinders stop working, the doors of the marketplace close. What is that a reference to? Once the grinders aren't working, then it's hard to also speak. So your lips close up. And then all those who once spoke and all those who once sang no longer speak or sing. It really is sad. It says, but this is like the common natural phenomenon. Everyone knows that this happens far from above. Again, even the almonds, right? This is where Chazal say the almond blossoms. And Chazal say, yeah, it blossoms and then it withers and dies within 21 days. Like the Shaked of Yirmiyahu that we just read about this past Shabbos. Right? Even the almond blossom dies. The Stabil HaChagav, the grasshopper, also withers up. The Tafer HaEvyona, some say it's a bird. Some say it's another type of creepy crawly that also goes away. Why? Just like man goes to Eit Olam, he leaves this world, and then the Savavu Bashuk Hasutim, and then the mourners come out. So when you think about death, that's exactly what he's saying. You realize that you want to maximize life. You want to invest. You want to plant as much as you can. There's nothing wrong with going and learning. There's nothing wrong with having a good time, but know that there are consequences. So knowing that there are always consequences, you want to invest in the best things that there are to invest in. And he hasn't fully said it yet, but Adasher lo yavatek chavel hakesef. Now, once upon a time, after they used to bury in an antechamber, right? The burial caves by Rishon. So, and they would leave the body there for 12 months until it completely decomposed. And then they would take bones and put it in the family cave. So they knew the process of decomposition. What goes first? Adasher lo yiratek chavel hakesef. He describes even the decomposition of the body. And he says, then the silver string cord breaks. Right? The first thing to go is the cartilage. As soon as it breaks, the spinal cord falls apart. V'tarut gulat hazahav. What's the gulat hazahav? Literally the golden marble, the skull, right? Once there's no cartilage, then the skull falls down. V'tishaver kad al hamabua. And then the entire container breaks with the contents. And then v'narot hagagal alabor. In other words, then the skin decomposes and everything, the blood, whatever liquid is gone. Everything decomposes. And then they used to put literally a galgal. Remember, if you've been to Susiat, you've been to any ancient burial cave, there was a galgal that they would put on the bore, right, on the burial cave. And then all that's left of the decomposed person is the dust of the earth that goes back to Shehaya. And then the same ruach, remember the ruach that has cycles? So the ruach has to go back. And he says there's a ruach. Tashuv el Elokim asher netana. The ruach goes back to its God, who gave it its spirit. Though he believes, it's not something he realizes, okay, but there's a spirit of man beyond the physical. The physical completely decomposes, but there's a ruach of man, right? We call it the neshama. The neshama goes back to God. Okay, then really, what should one say? That's what everything is, as we said, everything is ephemeral. Everything is, remember, again, effervescent, right? Everything is just going to disappear. And the end, and it really is like that vapor that disappears by the end, which is why many biblical scholars say, okay, this is the end of Kohelet. He's so frustrated. Hevel Havalim, he goes back to the very beginning. But really, that was it. Some claim that the last few psukim were added later. But you're going to see, no, that's exactly the point. He says, you really should say Hevel Havalim. But now you know that everything has a consequence. And therefore, everyone knows this. And the consequences continue even after death, right? They definitely continue in this world, right? Let's say I invested in a stock, right? And I don't know, the company dies, or, the stockbrokers, whatever it is, or the investors die, but that money is still working, right? Meaning there are still consequences, even posthumously. And then he realizes the same sefer where he kept on dismissing Olam Haba, realizes, wait, there must be a consequence of this world. Take a look at this. V'yoter. Well, wait a second. There is a yitaron. Shaya Kohelet chacham. It said the very fact that Kohelet was wise, od limad da'at ta'am. He realizes, are there consequences to his own wisdom? Yeah, he left this wisdom for us. Again, he taught the people, Izay michiker tikein mishalim harbe, bekish Kohelet limsod devrei chifetz, bekatuv, yosher devrei emet. And therefore he was searching after desirable ideas, and he wrote down words of truth. After all, Devrei Chachamim kedarvuno tukamasmi wrote nituim, the words of the Chachamim are like spears, and they're like deep-rooted pegs in the ground, right? They're so substantial. Balei asupot, and the Chachamim who sit together, Chazal say, Talmidei Chachamim who sit discussing their different ideas, and they don't even agree. Nitnu miro'acha, but they're all given from one shepherd, right? So Chazal understand it not as Moshe, believe it or not, but it's God, right? In other words, there is value to wisdom. Wisdom continues even after a person dies, right? The fact that we're learning Kohelet today is proof to that. But, pasuk yud bet, v'yoter mihimar. Excuse me, but there is a yitaron. There's an advantage even beyond wisdom, which of course we should anticipate because he saw the flaws of wisdom. He says wisdom is great, and you should try. You should realize that there are long ramifications of wisdom. Think of our lives today. It's so much easier to invest in, I'm going to say, even in proper planting. It's so much easier to invest. What he really means then is plant in avodat Hashem, right? And what God wants. It's so much easier because we're on, the shoulders of Achronim and Rishonim and Gaonim and Amoraim and Tanaim v'chulei v'chulei. And by the way, that applies to so much, right? Atara and Avital were just at a conference of mental health and resources, right? Thank God, right? We're in a better place today because of the studies that were done earlier, that were done before us. So he says, yes, wisdom is great. Wisdom is great and can help us in life. But that's not the goal. V'yoter mihima b'ni. But there's a yitaron. There's an advantage beyond investing in wisdom, albeit wisdom does have long-term consequences. B'ni hizahera sot svarim harbe. Don't invest all your time in writing books. In Kate's, because there's no end to it. Belag harbe. He says, and I'm not going back on what I said. People aren't going to respect you, right? They're going to mock you in the end, right? If they could buy J.K. Rowling or they could buy, I don't know, John Gutman, chances are they'll buy J.K. Rowling, right? But yeah, people Again, just know that it's good to have that wisdom, but there's lag harbe yigi basar. It also wears away the flesh. So he says wisdom is great and has its consequences, but it's not the be and end all. You want to know the be and end all? Drum roll. Sof davar hakol nishma. And when you learn this pasuk out of context, it sounds very poetic, but you don't appreciate its full meaning. Sof davar hakol nishma, out of context means, so in the end, hakol nishma, everything is heard. Again, I want to make my last statement for everyone to hear, but that's not what he means, because this is the end of the speech of the Yirei Elokim with which we began. How did it begin? It began in Perek Yud, Pasuk Chaf. Gam mimadacha melech al tekalel, uvachadrei mishkapcha al tekalel ashir, ki ol hashamayim yolichet hakol, uval knafayim yagid davar. Do you remember Sof davar? The end of every speech, hakol nishma. Everything gets heard. In other words, every single thing you do in this world has a consequence. And the consequence is not just for this world. And it's not just for your old age. And just as the Nehentan wanted to say, well, we don't see consequences, so there must not be consequences. He says, really? Again, everyone lives their lives based on the fact that we don't see consequences. When we plant a seed in the ground, we don't see the consequences, but we know that there are consequences. We don't know exactly how they're going to be. We don't know. I don't know if I'm going to reap everything that I planted. I don't know. There may be a hurricane. That's God. But I do the best I can. And there are, and I know that there are far-reaching consequences. And therefore, everything that's done in this world has a consequence. Self-davar, every word that I say, in the end, it's heard. Maybe not by who I wanted to be heard here, but it's heard. And every act that I do, it also is going to have a ripple effect. Not just here, but if I'm supposed to appreciate the meaning of life based on this world, in this world I see consequences, that means that this world must have a consequence. And that's what we call Olam Haba, which ironically is not really Olam Haba, right? Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, some of our parents here, again, they're not in a world to come. They're in that world right now. And they're living in that world based on what they did in this world. Sof davar hakol nishma. Right, this ends up being the most, I'm going to say, not just epistemological sefer, right, the one that contains so many ideas of knowledge, but eschatological sefer, the one that speaks about, oh my gosh, what happens after life? After life, there are consequences, right? And Chazal, based on Kohelet, say, oh my gosh, of course there are consequences. And therefore, et Elokim yirah, knowing that there are consequences, you may as well fear God. Because we see those consequences. Bet mitzvotav shamor. It doesn't make a difference. You're Jewish, you're Christian, you're Muslim. Follow the commandments of God. Yizeh kol ha'adam. That's the essence of me. You're here to plant as an Eved Hashem. Ki et kol maaseh Elokim yavi b'mishpat. Because every maaseh, God will bring. Sometimes in this world, sometimes you see it. That's why there's a machloket. What is karet? You die young, your children die young, or maybe it's that you lose a chelek in olam haba. We don't know. I don't know when there's going to be mishpat, but I know that there is mishpat. It may be now. I hope better now than later, right? Had kol hamaseh elokim yabi b'mishpat al kol ne'elam. Even those secrets, even the words and the actions that disappear that no one else sees, God knows. In Tov Imra, both the good and the bad. So all those times that you helped someone and you looked around, no one was there to say, kudos, yay, yasher koach, you did such a beautiful chesed. Or all those times that you gave tzedakah b'seter. And that's such a great feeling when you give tzedakah b'seter, because you're like, God, this is like between you and me. You know, only you know. And it's so beautiful, like especially when like no one ever finds out. Because you know that God knows. And yeah, there will be a consequence. What will it be? I don't know. Just like I don't know when I plant, but that's how we live. And that teaches us not only how to live now, but how to live for the short term and how to live for the long term. Now, you know that this is really the end of Kohelet. But when we read Kohelet, as we saw, only from the time of Rashi's Talmidim, basically only from more or less the end of the 12th century did we start to read Kohelet in a public forum. Then whenever we read something in a public forum, whether it be Eicha, whether it be Kohelet, whether it be the end of Malachi, we don't want to end with the words Ra, right? We don't want to end with the words Chayrim. We don't want to end with the words, with any negative. So we go back and we read the less negative pasuk before, so Adam, but recognize that it's not actually the very last pasuk. Which brings us now to how we started, which is why then was it instituted for many communities to read this on Sukkot? We discussed that Sukkot is a time and where it's the end of the agricultural cycle, and especially if it was read initially on a Hakel year, like at the end of 7 years, and you start asking yourself, really? Like, I have to do this all over again? I'm going to start planting again, just so I can harvest again. Like, what's the point? Like, what is the point of the cycle? And then you realize it's really not a monotonous cycle. There are a lot of variations within the cycle, and you determine what those variations are. And the point is to appreciate that it's not a cycle. It's an opportunity for reflection, an opportunity to think about what is the point of all of this, to realize the point is to plant as much as we can with our maasim, with our tefillot, with our hitnahagut, to learn a lot along the way. There's nothing wrong with that. To enjoy a lot along the way, nothing wrong with that, but that's not the goal. And the goal is to plant as many seeds and as quality seeds, and not to daven that we should be able to reap some of the benefits in this world, but even if we don't, we know that there will be consequences in the future, even if it means a different type of existence with our ruach, without the rest of the guf that completely decomposes, and therefore it can't really be about the guf at all. And that's just, again, the vehicle through this life. And that's why Kohelet really, or Sukkot really is the best time to reflect upon these ideas. It's the end of an entire year, the end of an entire agricultural season. I think that this coming Sukkot, we're going to reflect upon Kohelet in a very different way. I think that, Hashem was saying right after Shabbat, if you remember, the first day of Sukkot was Shabbat. In Chutz La'aretz, they read this on October 7th, Mamash on Kohelet of Simchat, the Shabbat of Simchat Torah Shmini Atzeret in Eretz Yisrael on the very first day. I feel like Hashem was saying, okay, you guys didn't really get the full message, did you? So I'm going to wake you up to the messages of Kohelet and help you realize that political decisions, religious decisions, personal decisions, they do have consequences. So make good ones for this coming year. I'm going to pause for a minute. There, that was the pause. Again, now to bring this back into the classroom, right, into the world of pedagogy. And some of you are probably wondering, Shani, really, out of every sefer that we could have learned this year, and why is it Kohelet? And many of you, and by the way, I generally dissuade elementary school teachers from teaching Kohelet, not just because of its depressing nature, but because of its more philosophically complex nature. At the same time, I want to see how every teacher has to know Kohelet, meaning the complexity of thought, the presentation of thought, the different voices in one's head. Kohelet really is the paradigmatic, I'm going to say, safer for educators to realize that these are questions that everyone should be asking. This is a sefer that, as Chazal say, validates the questions and tells us that, okay, we should keep asking questions because that's what's going to enable us to search for meaning. And therefore, Kohelet, Mishlei also, but I think Kohelet even more, brings up really, I call it the mechanics journey, right? Because these are questions that we all have to address before we come into a classroom. So it's not so much for your students, and I hope you recognize that along the way. It's not just teaching a methodology that, okay, for those who do teach in high school and post-high school, okay, now we have the tools, we can teach Kohelet, we can bring it into a classroom, we know the shift in speakers, we understand the dichotomy, we appreciate the methodology of 4 different speakers, and and thoughts and avenues of philosophy, but it's not really just a curriculum to bring into the classroom. It's really a way of edifying ourselves as teachers. And you're going to see, I hope, that you're going to bring in more intentional and even unintentional tangents based on Kohelet, because these are the questions that come up anytime and everywhere, right? You all know that. They come up in Chumash class, they come up in Navi class. They come up even, I'm teaching, I'm teaching Eza Dalin, actually in 15 minutes. So, they've been asking these questions like, oh, can you tell us about Olam Haba? Can you tell us about, Tzadik Varalo? And okay, I just have to learn Kohelet. But no, we're learning Masechet Tanit, and okay, yeah, Kohelet comes up, and as part of the not only the questions, but to appreciate the complexity of Chazal's thoughts as well, you have to know the starting point, and albeit Eov addresses just the cosmic issue, but therefore the answers are cosmic answers, right? They're answers from God. These are existential questions, and therefore the questions come from man with regard to man's existence. So I don't think any teacher is really properly prepared to deal with existential questions nor existential crises unless one, at least on a microcosmic level, learns Kohelet on one's own, experiences, or at least confronts these questions on one's own. And therefore, and the sefer of existentialism, I think, should be a required sefer for every machanechet, definitely for year 3 or year 2 of all the machanechot here. So I hope you agree. If you don't, you'll let me know, for perhaps not teaching it as part of Eshkolot in the future. But I'd also love to hear your continued feedback as you see how often this comes up in the classroom. And by the way, Chava, especially in adult education, you're going to see this as well. So would love, like, anytime anyone has like a Kohelet shout out, like to share it on the group. And speaking about the group, I look forward to continuing. I'm going to say perhaps more, again, the skills that you can bring into the classroom on an everyday basis. We said Be'ezrat Hashem, poetry and Tanakh for next year, but there are going to be emails like about this. We're calling it, I know the idea was like to call it the Yesodot, Eshkolot professional developments, and Kramim, right, the vineyards. So you're the vineyards. So again, to enable them to spread together with the Mayanot, Tahutza, and to create more panels. We're going to have more panel Zooms next year with various educators to enable more general Q&A in teaching Tanakh, and any other ideas that you have that I'd love to hear, to really take this to the next level, because I can't imagine not continuing to learn and to teach with each and every one of you. So I hope that's okay, not to say goodbye, but to say I look forward to September 15th, Be'ezrat Hashem, when we begin Eshkolot Elul of what will be Tafshin, strange, Tafshin Pei. Wow. Be'ezrat Hashem, hoping for better consequences of everything that we've been doing and investing in this year. So yes, any, I don't want to say final comments, any wishes for the week? How's that? This is so strange not to see you every week.
Hard. I guess one thing that I was coming out me was I'm going to be teaching halacha for the 7th grade next year, in addition to the Chumash, and just like thinking about my machzor prep classes. I think that a lot of these ideas can come in subtly, and I was very excited about that. But excited about everything. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Adisal, beautiful. That's right. You're going to say, Adam, Yisodo meha afar, Vesofo li afar. Like all of a sudden, you you think of Kohelet, Perik Yud Bet, you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what Kohelet is talking about. That it can't be about our physical nature in this world. That's right. There's so many existential ideas that are incorporated in our tefillot. Very true.
Can I be a cynic for 1 second?
Please. Oh, by the way, before you're a cynic, Tara, I was just going to say, I
Yeah.
always end this way. Actually, can I put you on hold, Tara, for 1 minute? 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Just to say that Does this answer everyone's questions of like the purpose of life? No, like you should still have arguments, right? Everyone see this, meaning it shouldn't resolve. It's like one say, okay, so it's not about, this world, it's about investing for future consequences. And people might say, well, we don't see them. And right, but it's not a foolproof argument. I just want everyone to realize
That-
that.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, like, it almost seems like meaning not that I disagree with it, because I think as from Jews, that's like the only outlook that we can have that makes sense. But it's kind of like an argument that comes by default as opposed to an argument that comes from proof. So, like,
100%. It's not
can't
exactly.
someone just counter and say, well, you don't know that there's Olam Haba, so like, there's really no point. Like, yes, he kind of proved that the Nehentan doesn't make sense and the Chacham doesn't make sense and like the Amal doesn't make sense, but he also doesn't necessarily make sense.
Exactly. Atara, I'm so happy you said this because I always say this. And when you have a live classroom, it's easier because there's always, like, you look around and not everyone, like, you don't like the ending, right? I'll point to someone, they're like, yeah. I'm like, I know, neither do I. But at the same time, like, I think about these ideas almost on a daily basis. Like, why am I doing this? And, okay, right? There are consequences, but you're right. I have no
But
proof.
that's because it speaks to you, right? Like, meaning, like, I could see, like, there are many people in this world that just don't, it doesn't speak to them the same way. So, like, what's to tell them, like, okay, so, like, in the end, like, we don't know. Like, there really isn't. So, really kind of like choose your, like, pick your poison, because, like, it doesn't matter which way you're going. You know what I mean?
100%, 100%. And that you're right in the sense, and in the end, that's why we say, the belief in Olam Haba, belief in Tchiyat HaMetim, meaning it makes sense, just like any philosophers of existentialism, they'll also argue, different
Right.
ideas.
So, even in terms of like teaching this to teenagers specifically, I guess, but even adults, like, you can't like, meaning there's really
Can't
only as
convince
much
them.
you could, right? Like, it's still, they could still learn Kohelet and then say, well, I don't buy that, and like not
Totally.
really believe in
Totally.
any of it.
A counselor just asked my husband and myself, said, okay, I have there are a lot of Mufunim in camp this month. Said that they're asking all these questions about Tzadik V'Ralo. And he said, like, how do I answer? I said, you can give answers. There are answers, but tell the child that they may not like the answers. And the truth is, they may find an answer they're okay with now, and then they're going to revisit it in 4 years from now, and they realize they didn't like that answer, and then they'll revisit it and hopefully come to a different answer. This is an answer. You see it? It is an answer, albeit in the end, it really is based a lot on emunah as well. But you're right, Atara. And it just, I hope it by you also validating that, okay, it doesn't solve everything and it's not for proof, and helps them like
Like, I
thinking.
almost feel like Kohelet like pushes like more atheism than like belief in God. I don't know, like, meaning just like no one knows, like, why bother believing it? Like, meaning why can't you just believe that, like, it's just random?
Because then I think about Parachute bets. Then I think about the consequences. There have to be consequences because everything in this world has consequences.
Yeah, but like that could also just be like natural consequences.
It could be, but you also see.
I mean, I'm
Funny,
clearly
true.
not like coming at this from an atheism point of view, but I'm just
Okay.
saying, like, can't you see how like this doesn't really leave people necessarily settled on belief in God?
Yes, I could see that as well. No question, no question. I
Okay,
also,
just saying.
sorry, yes. So it's important to continue. It opens the conversation and allows for the continuation of the conversation. And I also realize that I love to end also with sharing within the sunscreen song.
Ladies and gentlemen
1 second.
of the
Are you all familiar with the sunscreen song? No? Yes, by Buzz Aldrin. You'll see how many parallels there are to Kohelet. Everyone ready for this? 1 second. Just have to share
Is it called the sunscreen song?
the sunscreen song. You ready? Here it is. 1 second. Okay, I'm going to play it. Sorry.
Class of 99. Wear sunscreen. If I could offer you only one tip for the future, sunscreen would be it. The long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proved by scientists, whereas the rest of my advice has no basis more reliable than my own meandering experience. I will dispense this advice now. Enjoy the power and beauty of your youth. Oh, never mind. You will not understand the power and beauty of your youth until they've faded. But trust me, in 20 years, you look back at photos of yourself and recall in a way you can't grasp now how much possibility lay before you and how fabulous you really looked. You are not as fat as you imagine. Don't worry about the future, or worry, but know that worrying is as effective as trying to solve an algebra equation by chewing bubblegum. The real troubles in your life are apt to be things that never crossed your worried mind, the kind that blindsides you at 4 p.m. on some idle Tuesday. Do one thing every day that scares you. Sing. Don't be reckless with other people's hearts. Don't put up with people who are reckless with yours. Floss. Don't waste your time on jealousy. Sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. The race is long, and in the end, it's only with yourself. Remember compliments you receive. Forget the insults. If you succeed in doing this, tell me how. Keep your old love letters. Throw away your old bank statements. Stretch. Don't feel guilty if you don't know what you want to do with your life. The most interesting people I know didn't know at 22 what they wanted to do with their lives. Some of the most interesting 40-year-olds I know still don't. Get plenty of calcium. Be kind to your knees. You'll miss them when they're gone. Maybe you'll marry, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll have children, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll divorce at 40. Maybe you'll dance the funky chicken on your 75th wedding anniversary. Whatever you do, don't congratulate yourself too much, or berate yourself either. Your choices are half chance. So are everybody else's. Enjoy your body. Use it every way you can. Don't be afraid of it, or what other people think of it. It's the greatest instrument you'll ever own. Dance. Even if you have nowhere to do it but in your own living room. Read the directions, even if you don't follow them. Do not read beauty magazines. They will only make you feel ugly. Get to know your parents. You never know when they'll be gone for good. Be nice to your siblings. They're your best link to your past and the people most likely to stick with you in the future. Understand that friends come and go, but with a precious few, you should hold on. Work hard to bridge the gaps in geography and lifestyle, because the older you get, the more you need the people you knew when you were young. Live in New York City once, but leave before it makes you hard. Live in Northern California once, but leave before it makes you soft. Travel. Accept certain inalienable truths. Prices will rise, politicians will philander, you too will get old. And when you do, you'll fantasize that when you were young, prices were reasonable, politicians were noble, and children respected their elders. Respect your elders. Don't expect anyone else to support you. Maybe you have a trust fund, maybe you'll have a wealthy spouse. But you never know when either one might run out. Don't mess too much with your hair, or by the time you're 40, it will look 85. Be careful whose advice you buy, but be patient with those who supply it. Advice is a form of nostalgia. Dispensing it is a way of fishing the past from the disposal, wiping it off, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth. But trust me on the sunscreen.
Wow. Oops. second.
Ladies and gentlemen
Uh-oh,
of the class of 97.
here we go. But
Wear
oh, 1 second, I have to just stop it.
sunscreen.
Sorry. Okay. Have any of you heard that song before?
I
It
think
Like,
sound after, I think I did.
I always play it at the ends of Kohelet. Do you see all the parallels? And I ask them to, again, enjoy when you're young, because you won't have, the same body when you're old, but you recognize our consequences to everything from the friends that you make, the respect to your parents, and the idea of, don't be too nostalgic, right? But obviously you learn from the past for the sake of the future. So even if Atara, we can't always bring I'm going to say, and I mean this, all the answers to our students. I think it's important that when we come into a classroom, that we have some sense of clarity as to why we're doing what we do, and a sense of true understanding and belief, and definitely the openness to the questions that come our way.
That I agree with.
מצוין. So, בברכה להגדלת והדרת התורה, בברכה באמת to all of you, with everything that you're doing for your families, your communities, for all of Am Yisrael, and I can't wait to continue these very special relationships over the next few months and years. Be'ezrat Hashem. Hope that's okay. Gonna miss you.
Really, no words.
Thank you for your patience and your tenacity. Really, kol hakavod.
Thank you so much, Shani.
Thank you for adding all this extra time.
Simcha, mamash b'simcha.
No one wants to get off.
Okay, I really did proceed. So,
thank you very much, Shani.
It's good. We're gonna talk on the WhatsApp chat. It'll be good.
Nachon, Mitsuyan. Thank you. Thanks.